Hi, I'm Nuwan Gebelanege, and today we are going to discuss real-time sentiment analysis from Twitter using Azure Streaming Analytics. Now, there are a couple of concepts that we need to cover here. One is around the architecture, and then we will go into the detail of how we can use this streaming analytics process. So there are multiple ways that you can do real-time sentiment analysis. One option is where you can plug in your Twitter feed into an Azure Cognitive Service and push it into Power BI, which is easy. But here what I'm trying to do is trying to demonstrate how to use Twitter, how to use Databricks, how to use streaming analytics, and all those concepts. So the first part here is to pull the data from Twitter. So you need to have a Twitter developer account to pull this information in. And I'm using Azure Databricks as the second option. On Azure Databricks, I create a listener where it listens to Twitter on certain key phrases, and then we push the information into an Azure Event Hub. And from the Event Hub, it does the transformation through the streaming analytics, and we can push this information into multiple sources. On the transformation steps, I can use either Azure Machine Learning or Databricks to do the transformation to identify the sentiment. But given that I'm already using Databricks as step number 2, I can do the transformation there itself. So my real data flow comes from Twitter, moving into Azure Databricks, and from Azure Databricks it moves on to Azure Event Hub. From the Event Hub, it goes via a streaming analytics service into Power BI. On streaming analytics, you have inputs, outputs, and queries. So the inputs for streaming analytics could be another streaming analytics service itself, or an Azure Event Hub, an Azure IoT Hub, or a blob store. And within streaming analytics, you can do the transformation using Azure Machine Learning or Databricks. And then the outputs can be a file store, another Event Hub, IoT Hub, an Azure SQL database, a blob store, or Power BI. So let's get started with pulling Twitter information into Azure Databricks. Before we get started, there's a bit of configuration that we need to do within Twitter in order for us to be able to pull tweets using an API. So you need to go into developer.twitter.com, and from there you can look into the use cases. So there are many use cases available, and there are top endpoints, the most common endpoints that are being used. So today we are going to use a search API, and we have the documentation available. Within the documentation, you can go into your quick start. You can create a developer account, register an app, and then you can set up an environment. So in order for you to create a developer account, which I've already created, you just click there, and then it will ask you for some details, and then you simply have to provide the details and create the developer account. And then you can go back and restart your application. I have already created an application here. You can go into create app and then give the necessary details. And there is a fair bit of information that you need to provide here so that they can assess what this is being used for. And once it is done, you can create your app. Within the app, you will get your API keys and tokens. Once you get the API keys and tokens, you can keep them safe and push them into your Databricks data flow to pull requests from Twitter. Now that's all that we need to do on Twitter. I'm going to go into my Azure account, and the first thing that I'm going to do here is provision a Databricks cluster. So you can search for Databricks, and then you get on with creating a new Databricks service. You can select your subscription, and then you can use your resource. You can use an existing resource group or create a new. Now, in order for me to be able to keep it clean, I'm going to create a new resource group, and I'm going to call it Twitter Analytics. Then you need to give a workspace name for the Databricks environment. So I'm going to call it WS Twitter Analytics, and you need to specify which region it's going to be in and the pricing tier. So I'm going to stick with the standard pricing tier, and I'm going to keep it in the UK South. So you go into networking. At the moment I'm not gonna set up my own virtual network. I'm gonna leave it as it is, and then we review and create. There we go. So the deployment is in progress. Now that we have created our Twitter account and the Databricks workspace, we need to create a few more resources, namely our input data source, which is going to be an event hub, then our streaming analytics job, and we could plug that into another Databricks environment or a Zoom machine learning functionality if we were to do the sentiment analysis there. But given that we are going to do the sentiment analysis in the first Databricks environment we configured, we don't need any more functionality there. And then our output. So for our output, we need to have a Power BI account and a Power BI portal. So let's get started with creating our resources. Now I'm inside my resource group. So we're going to create a new event hub. First, we need to create an event hubs workspace. So we search for event hubs, create. It's already selecting my resource group, and just give it a event hubs workspace name. Select the region and go for the standard pricing tier. If you go for the basic pricing tier, you will be able to have only one consumer group. It's gonna be sufficient, but in order for us to make it efficient, we're gonna go for the standard. We review and create. Now it says the deployment has succeeded, and we can go to our resource. So we've got a workspace. Now we need to create an event hub. So we create it with a name and the default configuration. Then we go into the event hubs. So we have the event hub that we created, and in here we need to go to the shared access policies. We haven't set up any policy yet, so we need to create a new policy. We're going to call it shared access policy event hub 1 and create it. Once it's created, this connection string is going to be useful for us to create our connection from Databricks to Event Hub. Now that we have created our Event Hub, we can go back to our Databricks cluster. I'm going to launch the workspace. We need to create a new cluster here. We're going to use the standard mode, and we're going to keep the default settings. We're going to make sure that it terminates after 15 minutes of inactivity so that the costs can keep down. I'm just going to create the cluster. So it's pending. It's going to take a little while for the cluster to start up. Until it starts up, we can add a few libraries. So we're going to use PyPy and then add the packages. First thing is the Azure Event Hub. I'm going to install that. Add another one. On the Azure Event Hub checkpoints to blob. Add the Twitter API. And then the text blob. Text blob is a library that is available from Google. And finally we are going to install the NLTK, the Natural Language Toolkit, which is required for the text blob to work properly. Now our cluster has started, so we are waiting for the libraries to get installed. And in the meantime, we can go in and create our notebook. We're gonna choose the default language as Python. As you would know, we can switch the language as and when we want, but for the time being we are going to use Python, and then we're going to use the cluster that we have created right now. So we need to import a few libraries here. We'll need to import the async IO library, given that we are going to do some real-time streaming here. There are a couple of libraries that we need to import to support the Event Hub. 3 more from Twitter API. As you see here, we are trying to make it efficient. Rather than importing the whole library, we are just importing the necessary parts. Then we will need to import JSON, because we will use JSON to manipulate the strings that are coming in and then push it into our streaming analytics. Finally, we need to import the natural language toolkit and the text blob libraries. Once we import these, there are a couple of files that we need to import. You need to import these to support the natural language toolkit. So let's run this cell and see if it all runs perfectly. Yeah, it's all good. We'll create a new cell here, and we're gonna write a few functions. This function is used to get a text from anywhere, and then we can identify the sentiment from this sentence. So let me do a little bit of tweaking here. So we are going to print the sentiment here for each sentence that come through this function. First we'll run this function, and then we'll call this function, and see what happens. So the polarity value is 0.7, so therefore we identify it as a positive sentiment. So we deleted the cell, and we get rid of the unnecessary text. I just wanted to show you how it works. So within the same cell, we can add another function where we push the information into Twitter. So we're gonna define a run function. In order for us to run this properly, we need to get the connection string from the Event Hub we created. So we go back to our Event Hub. From our shared access policy, we can copy the connection string. We go back to our workbook and create an event producer, and we need to get the connection string, which we get from our Event Hub. We need to give our Event Hub name, and then we need to add this piece of code. I'll make this code available in the description. So we have created the function that we need. Now we need to create a listener to Twitter. We define the onData function. So what it does is it's gonna loop the event, and then we're gonna wait for the text to come in, and it will connect to this get blob sentiment function, and then pass the text and the time that it was created. And we can also define a function on error. What should we do? Once we have all those 4 information, we can provide the 4 keys that we generated from Twitter. Then we need to set up the authentication to Twitter. Then we start the Twitter stream, passing the listener class that we have created. Finally, we are going to pass our stream filter with the word that we need to track. Now here you can track multiple words, but for the moment we are going to just track the word positive. So let's go ahead and run our command. It's taking just less than a second, and there we go. We have some tweets coming through. And let's go into our Event Hub, and you can see that there's workloads coming through. Now we have completed 3 sections of our journey. We have started pulling data from Twitter through a developer account, and we are using Databricks to pull that information and then push it into an Azure Event Hub. The next step is for us to create a streaming analytics job. Now I'm in my resource group. I need to add another resource. We search for stream analytics, create a new job. So we give it a name. Select the location as UK South and we host it on the cloud. We are happy with 3 streaming units and we create. We go inside our resource. We need to have inputs, functions, queries and outputs. So first thing, we go inside our inputs. So right now we don't have an input, we just add a streaming input and we say that it is from an event hub. It selects my current namespace. It allows me to select my current event hub namespace and the event hub. I mean, if you have more, you can add or you can create new event hubs and so on. So we need to provide the event hub policy name. We can use an existing policy, which is the event policy we created. The consumer group, we can use the default consumer group, and the serialization format JSON. That's why we selected the JSON library in our Python, and then we are happy with the current encoding and the compression type. We need to provide an alias so that it's easier for us to refer to, and then finally save it. Now we don't have any functions here, but if we had any functions where we specified either a Databricks or a Azure machine learning capability, this is the place to add them. So we go straight into our query, and then we can specify where the output is and then where it is going into. So it's there is a input preview that is already available. Before we go into the query, we can go and create an output. So in terms of the output, we can call it Power BI, and then it is going to ask me to authorize my Power BI account. So it needs me to provide an output alias. This time I'm going to call it Twitter output, and it's going to go in my current workspace, because if more workspaces, it would have gone there. And then we can give a data set name. An authentication mode, we can use a token. Save it. So we have a Twitter output, we have an input. Now we need to build our query. So we can say select all into. From my event hub. And we can test the query. So that's the output that we have. There's an example of that. Now that we have a basic query, there are a few things that we need to consider here. This is going to be a streaming data input, and therefore time is going to be of essence. There are windowing functions in order for us to enable the correct timing. So there are 4 types of windows called tumbling window, hopping window, sliding window and session window. There's a fair bit of understanding that you need to have about these windows in order to determine which window to use. In this scenario, I'm going to use a sliding window because we can aggregate the results that has come through within that window. First, we need to identify the sentiment category. So what I'm going to do here is to identify If the sentiment is greater than a 0, it's a positive. If it is less than a 0, it's a negative, and if it is something else, it's a negative. It's a neutral. Then we need to have the sum of sentiment. You can use count here, but once we go through the output, you will understand why I have used sum. We'll wait for that. Now it gives me an error because there's no group by functionality. So we need to group our sentiment data by the sentiment category. And the moment you use a group by function, you need to have a window that determines how we are going to produce the output. So here we are going to use the sliding window, and I'm going to use it every 2 seconds. So I can save this query here, and the term positive that we added is going to be skewed towards the positive side, and therefore I'm going to add another term here as Brexit. So there are people arguing both sides, and we're going to start my Databricks environment, go back to the overview tab. Okay. So we can edit the query by you going into the edit query function as well. And now we need to add the timestamp of the tweet that is coming through. So save, test it, and it gives me the number of tweets that are coming through. Save and start my streaming analytics service. You have the option to start it now, or at a particular time, or from the point where it last stopped. So we start it now. Now I'm in my Power BI portal, and when you go into the data sets, you can see that we have the DS Twitter that we created earlier. I can create a dashboard here. I can add a tile saying that I'm gonna get a custom streaming data source. We have the DS Twitter available as a data source, and the default here is a card. So I want to create a line chart here, and my axis is going to be based on the time, and the value is going to be based on the tweets. And there we go. It's showing me the tweets that are coming through, and so this way you can see whether there are positive comments or negative comments coming through. You can see the negatives are going under 0, and then positives are going above, and that's why I've selected the sum of Twitter value instead of the count. We have a real-time data analytics dashboard now, which you can refer to anytime. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.